Okay, so here I want to go through a short how-to with machine simulation on a head-head 5-axis machine. And this is going to be a special scenario that I want to point out some problems that might arise just due to how this machine is configured. And what you'll notice is so if I set the center of the rotaries at the origin here, you'll notice that the spindle does not lie on the C-axis center. So this is a CA configuration. The A lies along the X-axis, and the C is lying along the Z-axis. And the spindle is not lining up with the center of the C-axis, so there's a shift in there. The other thing you'll notice is that the gantry on this machine travels. Right? This isn't a stationary gantry with a y-axis on the table, so the workpiece is not mounted on a moving table, right? The machine moves about the workpiece. And this presents some interesting dynamics to building the machine simulation. So let's go through and launch Machine Sim here. And I'm going to start by just launching with the standard head that's found right inside. So it's the Como vertical mill head router here. That's it's installed standard with Mastercam. So I'm going to simulate based off of that I just have a generic toolpath in there. All right. And just to point this out, that I'm not going to go through the details of the machine sim here. I went through those details in another video on that's on here that went fully in depth of how to save off the STLs and all that stuff. So I'm not going to go into that much detail, but I'm going to quickly kind of go through and show you what's involved in building the machine sim. So to do that, this is the standard 5-axis head machine, and let's go off and save these files off of this machine. Obviously, this machine is super simplified, but the basics to build the machine are all there. So we're going to start by saving off. We're going to save off all these different files, and you'll notice the STLs have to be in position. So I have the STLs all lined up with the origin at the axis center of rotation. So I'm going to go File, Save Some, and first thing I'm going to grab is this spindle. And we're going to save it on the desktop. I've got this head 5-axis router folder. We're going to call this spindle. And we need to save these as STLs. Saved. Okay, File, Save Some. We'll call this, again, save it as an STL. We'll call this C-axis components. Save. Okay, then we've got this column, File, Save Some. We'll save this again as an STL. We'll call this Z-axis column. Save. Now we're going to grab this. So this is going to be the X-axis traveling along the gantry. I'll save some. STL. X-axis. Whoop. STL. X-axis on gantry. Save. We'll grab the gantry itself. And obviously, if your machine's more detailed, you're going to be saving a lot more of these off. So that's a good reason to simplify that model as much as possible to give you the detail that you want to see in your machine sim. So we'll call this the gantry. Okay. And then lastly, we got this base. So again, as an STL, we'll call this base. Save. Oh, did I grab? I'm going to resave that base because I think I had that selected. File, Save some. I'm going to overwrite those base ones. STL, base, save. Yes. And I think I may have done the same thing with the gantry, so just in case, we'll overwrite that gantry. STL, gantry. Not a big deal, but we'll overwrite it just in case. All right. So now I'm in the machine sim. We have that default one. Everything looks good here, right? The toolpath runs. That's fine. But we want to build a new machine. So I'm going to go to Edit Machine Mode, and I'm going to create a new one. All right. Now, when you're building a machine, you need to start at the very base of that machine. And what's unique about this 5-axis head-head machine is because the workpiece is not sitting on a moving table, it's not sitting on top of an axis, the workpiece is what the rest of the machine is going to be geared around. So I'm going to actually, the first thing I'm going to do is go add dynamic element, add workpiece set. Okay, so that's what my machine is going to be built on top of the workpiece, and that's kind of different than most machine sims out there. So that's kind of unique to this machine. All right, once I have the workpiece in there, on top of that workpiece, we're now going to add our, we'll add a translational axis, and the y-axis sits on top of there. Okay, and on the y-axis, we'll put some geometry associated with that. And what's sitting on top of the y-axis, let me go back to my desktop where we save those, but what's sitting on top of the y-axis is the gantry. Okay, so that's what's sitting on top of the y-axis. On top of the y-axis, then we're going to add another translational axis. That's going to be the x-axis. And we'll add some geometry to that. And on top of that is going to be the x-axis on the gantry. We'll stack the z-axis now on top of that x-axis. I'm going to add some geometry to the z, and we're going to add the z-axis column. Okay, so now we've got all the linear axes all defined. The one thing we don't have the base in here yet, and that base is actually going to sit on top of the workpiece as well. So we'll add a piece of geometry to that. So you can see the order's not too critical as long as it all ends up in the right location on the tree. Okay, so on top of the z-axis, all our linear axes are done. We want to add a rotational axis. And in this case, it's going to be that c-axis that's fixed to the end of the z-axis column. We'll add some geometry to that. And we're adding the c-axis components. Those will take a little bit to load because they're a little more detailed than the rest of the STLs. Okay, there's our c-axis components loaded on there. That looks good. And then on top of the c-axis, we are going to add the final rotational axis, which will be a axis, which rotates about x. And the geometry we're going to add to that is our spindle. Okay, and I can go in and add colors and appearances to all these components, but that's covered better in my other video. So for now, we're just going to concentrate on this part. So with most machine sims, we want to build them such that the spindle nose is right on the nose of the origin, and we didn't do that here. So we have something very special we have to do to shift that, to let the machine sim know that our spindle face is down here and not up here. So on top of the spindle, the first thing we're going to do is add a dynamic element, and we're going to add our tool set on there. So that gives us the holder transform of that tool set. Now in this holder transform, that's where you're going to enact that shift that's going to push that spindle nose back up to the origin. So Mastercam knows where to load the tool into the spindle. To do that, we'll go back to Mastercam and analyze our file. So I'm just going to go home, analyze. I want to make sure I'm in the top plane here. There we go, top. That's good. and we're going to analyze our position off the spindle nose. And you'll see that we've got an X of 63.5, a Y of minus 0.036, and a Z of minus 191.174. All right, so we're just going to copy and paste these. Control C, go back over into my machine sim, and the shift in X is going to be that amount. Shift in Y, let's jump back over there. That'll be minus 0.036. Jump back into my machine sim. Control V. Back over there again, and Z is minus 191. Okay, so now I have that shift into my holder transform. All right, and I want to save this machine, and I'll just save the machine as, and we'll call this, we'll put it in that same folder, and we'll call this big head router. Okay, and that's where this machine is going to be saved. Save. Now I can also associate a JPEG with this machine if I want. If I had a picture of the actual machine that I want to show up in the Mastercam interface, I could save that in there. That's covered in my other video. So that should be all set. We can come out of edit now. And if we come out of edit, we just want to do a quick understanding, make sure we've got everything right. So X, I didn't set any of the limits or anything for the machine. You'd want to do that. But we just want to make sure all our axes are doing what we think they're going to be doing. Right, all this stuff seems to be working right. Let's zoom in a little bit and see if we can get an idea on our rotaries. So the A axis, that looks pretty good. C, pretty good. All right, so I think all that's working. So we should be good to go. We save this. So I'm just going to go ahead and X out of the machine sim, X out of analyze here. And I have that folder on my desktop here. Go back to my desktop. And we've got this big head router. If we go in there now, all the associated components should be with it. So I'll go back to desktop. I'm going to copy this. If I want it available to me in Mastercam Machine Sim, I'm going to want to go to my shared 2019 folder. You can access that through C, Users, Public Documents, Shared 2019. And in here we have our Machine Sim. That's going to show all my machines I have loaded up. And I'm going to paste that folder right in here. All right. So now all those components are inside that folder. If we look in here, we've now got our, and we don't really want this in here. I'm going to cut this out of here. Get rid of that. We don't need that Mastercam file in there. So we got our XML and all our STLs that assemble those. We could also, like I said, have an image in there that will show up in the Mastercam interface. So that's all set. We've got our toolpath. Let's go through and go to the Machine Sim, and we'll launch the Machine Sim options. Now that should be available in our drop-down list. It is Big Head Router. Just going to put a translation in Z, so we're coming off where we're modeled in the file. I'm just going to push it back in Y by 200 millimeters and push it up in Z by 50 millimeters. That'll just put it more into the envelope for what we're showing here. Okay, I'm going to say simulate. That'll take a little bit of time to load. It is a pretty physically large machine simulation. Okay. And because I have my machine simulation in the same file, the workpiece is actually showing as the machine is showing as part of the workpiece. So I'm going to just shut that off, so we're just seeing the machine sim. And you can see the toolpath there. And we turn the speed down here and hit run. Looks like I'm getting the motion I thought I should. Everything looks pretty good. So, I mean, those are a couple unique situations here. The fact that, you know, the spindle nose is not centered on the rotaries with a head, and the fact that I don't have a table with an axis on it that the workpiece is loaded onto, right? So the first thing in my machine sim, because of that fact, is the workpiece. The machine is essentially built around the workpiece because the workpiece is stationary. So that's kind of unique. And then having to add that holder transform component to the machine sim is also kind of unique. But that's I think that covers the two aspects of the machine sim that I wanted to cover.